Okay, here we go. First video on Marx. Now, it's going to be a little bit different this week. A lot of you probably love Marx. A lot of you probably have teachers who really love Marx. And so what all I'm going to do really is point out the fact that a lot of people don't understand Marx because they don't read him carefully. And so I'm just going to go over and touch on a couple of things. I'm just going to point out certain passages and if that are on the study guide. And if you really read them closely, it really does mean what you think it means. In other words, yes, he's a racist. Yes, he's a sexist. Yes, he's a Luddite. You know, all of these things that no one ever really talks about. Yes, that's Marx. Understand that Marx, as a person, and I know we're not supposed to talk about a person's personality, talk about his ideas, otherwise it's an ad hominem argument, right? You're going to try to go after his character rather than try to address the points of his argument. But you got to understand something about Marx. He was the son of, or actually, he married the daughter of this rich person. He was kicked out of Germany. Oh, as a matter of fact, and his father too was extremely wealthy. And so he basically was a lifelong student because it's an easy life. You don't have to work, you just pretend to study. And you spend a lot of money. And so he spent a lot of money. He never worked a day in his life. And he hated the idea of even getting a job and socialism. Okay. This is Marxism. All right. So if you look at the study guide, you'll see, and if you did the reading first, a lot of people, when they read it for the first time, me too, uh, you read it and you're like, yeah. Like when he traces the history and he says, yeah, the bourgeoisie, that the bougie, so the rich people, the owners of capital, the factories, the people who give other people jobs, they're evil. They control and they keep us down, and you're always going to have the proletariat. And so he looks at the world as a two-class, supposedly, a two-class system. You got the bourgeoisie, proletariat. I spelled them for you on the study guide, so anyway, cut and paste, right? Anyway, um, so bourgeoisie, proletariat. Bourgeoisie are the people who are the wealthy. They own all the property. Proletariat, these are the workers. And most people, when they read it, they're like, yeah, that's what it's all about, the workers against us rich people. Yeah, well, see, that's the little perspective knowledge production trick that people like Marx and who use knowledge production really, really well to get you to think in a narrow-minded kind of way. So you don't think about exceptions, you don't think about other situations, you're just thinking about what they're telling you to see. Ignore everything else. All right. So it basically says, history is a history of class struggles. And so you can explain all the history of the world just by looking at class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So let me ask you, are SEPTA workers bourgeoisie or are they proletariat? Now you might say, trick question, SEPTA workers, they're workers, so therefore proletariat. Well, would you be surprised to know that these proletariats make more money than school teachers? They make more money than me. New York public transit workers make around $90,000 a year. I don't know about Philly workers. I would assume that maybe because the standard of living is a little lower, maybe $70,000 to $80,000 a year. Driving a bus, not too shabby. So are they still proletariat? Do you still count that as proletariat? I don't know. That sounds a little bougie to me. So if a husband and wife both are SEPTA workers, they're bringing in $160,000 a year. Kind of bougie, I think. Right. And so this is the thing where a lot of people try to use this nomenclature, this classification method that Marx is talking about, and they try to apply it to our society. Does not work. And the reason is because America is not a class-based society. Keep in mind, he was writing in Europe. And in Europe, they did have classes. They did have nobles. They did have the peasants and all this other kind of stuff. That's what the whole history of Europe is all about. He wrote this while he was in England. And in England, they were having the Industrial Revolution, lots of wealth being generated, right? And you remember from the Friedman videos, and he's upset. Okay, he is really pissed off by this. He's look at all these exploited workers, et cetera, et cetera. But he still doesn't want to work, right? He has no way of providing for his family, but he's trying to figure out a way where he does not have to work. Um, so usually they're poor and oppressed, but I don't think you would consider city transit workers as being oppressed. If anything, when they go on strike, they are the oppressors. Also, and this we'll get into this in Wollstonecraft, but class-based society, I don't think anyone in this class really can comprehend, but that you are stuck in that class. You cannot change your class. Whereas in America, you could be really, really rich, lose all your money, and then now you're poor. Or you could be really, really poor, like a Rockefeller or a Vanderbilt, and work real hard and make a lot of money, and now, bam, you're rich, okay? So people move and flow, which is why Americans looked so, I mean, they were hated all over Europe, because you could be from a family background that has no money, right? You're a new money family, and you're trying to mingle with old money families. They're like, ugh, these Americans, they're nouveau riche, new money. And so, which means you have no class, no manners, right? You don't have any etiquette, any of this other kind of stuff. All right. So that's what uh, Marx is referring to when he talks about bourgeoisie and proletariat, thinking about a class-based society where you can't change your class. It doesn't really work in America, but people gloss that and they say, no, 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 it's all about the workers in America. Yeah, I don't think so. You could try to think that way if you want, but that's not how it actually works. Um, let's see. I'm just going to read quotes. All right. So let's see. Page 10, it seems that he bemoans the loss of guilds. Now, remember what guilds are. That is monopoly on skills, right? And because of guilds, if you needed a blacksmith, you had to go to a blacksmith. You couldn't go to Home Depot and do your blacksmithing yourself. You had to go to an actual blacksmith where he can overcharge for his services. And so he wants guilds. See, that's what's crazy, right? So that's what Marx wants. He wants monopolized knowledge. He wants monopolized technology and jobs. And he goes, it seems that he bemoans the loss of guilds through the decrease. I'm just reading from the study guide, right? So you can follow on. Through the decrease in price and products and the division of labor. In our class, we would see this as progress and breaking up monopolies so that everyone could have access to certain goods and services, even to do the work oneself. In other words, specialization, division of labor brings the cost down, the price down of everything. You can produce more. Of a Henry Ford, right? Assembly line, this kind of thing. You go to from having cars which are too expensive for the average person to buy to many people can buy. I mean, just think of the Quid from a couple weeks ago, right? $6,000 car. You go from, oh, I can't afford a $30,000 car, to, oh, I can afford a $6,000 car. You see, so when you lower prices, even lower income people are able now to participate and have some of the stuff that before only wealthier people, middle class people could enjoy. And so here goes, the guild masters were pushed aside by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. This is a good thing, and Marx is saying this is bad, right? So for Marx, for prices to go down is very, very bad. People call that deflation today. Why people are upset that prices of products are going down is, why would anyone complain? Consumers would never complain. And some of you were complaining last week that prices of food are going through the roof. Why is that? It's because government is messing with your money. Next quote, bourgeoisie has put an end to all feudal patriarchal idyllic relations and has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left no other bond between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment, right? And so look, what's he complaining about? He's complaining the end of the patriarchy. He's complaining about the end of feudalism, where you have peasants and landed gentry. He is upset about this, right? So can Marx really, with this attitude, say anything that any of us would actually like? And there are a lot of Marxists, there are a lot of communists, there are a lot of socialists who love this stuff. Keep in mind too that farming is backbreaking work. Farming sucks. Okay, no one wants to be a farmer. If any of you had to help your parents in the garden and you had to turn over the soil, that's hard, especially if you're doing it with a shovel. Because you don't got a machine. My dad would call me over. He says, "Hey, we got to turn over the garden, right?" I go over there and I get one row done. I turn around, he did the whole garden, everything that I was supposed to do. He does it so quickly. He's like, "What? Not a big deal." Anyway, it's hard. It's hard work. I'm not a wuss. Let's see. But yeah, so he wants the patriarchy. He wants people to be peasants. I thought he was complaining about in favor of the working class rising up. Let's see. Page 11, he talks about free trade. When people are given freedom, they prefer free trade. Oh, really? In Marx's eyes, this is bad because he starts to see things in terms of cost, price, and value. This caused the end of the feudal era. For our class, bringing an end to the feudal period is a good thing, right? No one has to be a serf. By the way, serfs paid less in taxes than we do today. Okay, so at this point, we have to aspire to reach the level of a serf. Think about that for a minute, okay? For those of you who think that being a serf, being a peasant sucks, okay, their taxes were lower than ours. Think about that. Next quote, it has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of numberless, indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up the single unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. Really? That's a whole lot of words for saying, wait a minute, you mean I can buy and sell to anyone I want instead of buying and selling to the people you want me to? Yeah, I'll do that. So basically he's saying everyone wants free trade except him, and he can't understand why. All right, life is getting better, things are getting cheaper, the world is getting smaller, right? We can travel, we can have more peace, and Marx is like, no, this is terrible. Okay. And then curiously, when he's describing history, right, don't you think it's interesting that the bourgeoisie, which is a small number of people, can control this huge number of proletariat? How can they do this? Because they're in bed with government. One thing that you will realize is that all through this chapter 1, he never mentions government, right? So I have here, there's little discussion of government and the role it played in the class struggle. In other words, we learn through Friedman that government enables and protects corruption and bad regulations. In fact, they are the source of most corruption and all bad regulations. Never talks about Marx, never talks about it. Marx, you should always remember, is not an economist. And so a lot of the stuff, he's just sort of like sitting in his desk and saying, "Ooh, how do I understand this?" And then he tries to describe it poorly. And then he gets all this weird stuff. But of course, you won't hear this from a Marxist. But to my defense, it's all there in the PDF. Okay, you can read it yourself, unless you skim it and don't really read it, then you'll still think he's awesome. So the bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. So bourgeoisie are liberal, which makes Marx a conservative. He doesn't want the world to change. Now think about this for a second. He's writing in the middle of the 1800s. Toilets are still outside, okay? A lot of the modern amenities that we have today did not exist. Now, if Marx had his way and society never changed from 1850, okay, we'd still, I don't know what we'd be riding horses still. You understand what I'm saying? He is a conservative. He doesn't want certain things to change. Why anyone would be an advocate of Marx is beyond me. Then next quote, all old established national industries have been destroyed or daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction become a life and death question for all civilized nations by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw materials drawn from the remotest zones. He is a nationalist. What does that mean? Well, in today's terms, whenever someone says that someone is a nationalist, like, oh, I don't know, Trump, he's a Nazi. Oh, really? So maybe Marx, hmm? Because actually, what is a Nazi? Nazi is an abbreviation of national, right? National. Uh, Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei, right? So the National Socialist German Workers' Party, something like that, right? So basically, they're Marxists, okay? They're nationalists. So if you're a socialist, then you're closer to being a Nazi than if you're a capitalist, right? So it's not the capitalists, it's not national capitalists, it's national socialists, okay, who are the Nazis. And so being a socialist means you're closer, one step closer to being a nationalist than a capitalist who is about the individual. There is no idea of nation in capitalism. You do business with whoever you want. And so he's really upset that nationalism is being undermined. I don't know, do with that what you will. In place of the, but you see what professors do when they start calling capitalists Nazis? Really makes me upset. Uh, in place of the old local national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. In other words, basically, there's more peace among nations, no more war. And he's upset about that. Can you believe this guy? Oh, here I have it. Nazi is short for Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterspartei. So the Soviets and Germans were both Marxists. They were both different kinds of socialists, and they just hated each other because of racist reasons, right? The Russians hated Germans, and Germans hated Russians. It's a racist thing, even though they were all white. Cheap prices, it's a good thing, but Marx hates it. He hates cheap prices. He wants prices to be high. Labor value theory. This is one of the serious problems of Marx. He believes that the value of something comes from how much time was required to make it. So if I made a handmade pencil, because it took me, let's just say, 20 hours to make it, I can charge you $200 for that. Handmade pencil, right? So he thinks that the value comes from how much time was required to produce it. So if, right, it takes me 20 hours to make one pencil, but then I create a machine that can make 200 pencils per minute, that's bad, right? Because then the price of the pencils come way down, and now I'm going to starve to death, because Marx, being kind of the economic dolt that he is, doesn't understand that when pencils are $200 each, I can't sell very many pencils, okay? But if I can make 200 in a second or a minute, I can sell lots of pencils, and so I can make lots of money. And everyone gets pencils, you see? And so that's what he doesn't understand. He's just so economically ignorant that he doesn't understand that productivity, your ability to be able to make more efficiently, cheaper, makes life better for everybody. He doesn't get that. So he wants to preserve the old ways, keep everything expensive, don't change anything, because this is the best, right? And that's what he believes. And that's just so absolutely horrible. He also believes that concentrated property is bad, but, and so here on page 13, he says, Marx believed that capitalism results in the concentration of the most material physical things, population into cities, property in the hands of few, regions become countries, etc. And this is a persistent complaint. However, you have to realize that Marx is an advocate of the concentration of power. He is all about political centralization, which is what we're seeing today in America, obviously, because we're becoming more socialist, right? And so what he is seeing, he wants more and more power to be centered in Washington. Less power for you and me, more power for those corrupt politicians who are going to spend our money as if, it's going out of style, making us poorer in the process. Remember what I said, wealth gaps, all of these wage spec poverty is created by fiscal mismanagement by the government. Okay, all of that. And if we had time, I'd explain to you. If you show up, if anyone showed up on office hours Thursday or Friday, I'd explain that a little bit more. But yeah, he's all about concentrated property. He says it's bad, but at the same time, he advocates for political centralization, which is even bigger than property, because the government, through the use of force, can take away everyone's property, which is what the government is doing these days with the wealth tax, right? If you really understand what a wealth tax is, it's a way to transfer ownership of everything to the government eventually, 10 years tops. The bourgeoisie forced the weapons that so this is where a lot of Marxists love to say, oh, because of their corruption, the bourgeoisie corruption, the proletariats will rise and have a revolution. Yeah, I don't think so. That's not how it works, right? The complaint of the underclass is because of government corruption, not because people are providing jobs, wealth, opportunity to everybody else, right? Remember, there's a difference between the free market and crony capitalism, all right, where people like Bezos and the Zuckerbergs, they get wealthier and wealthier, and while they're destroying all the small businesses, right, shifting all of the wealth, the transfer of wealth to go from the small businesses to the large corporate businesses that are connected to government, right? That's what all the bailouts are all about, bailing out the crony businesses, bankrupting all of the small businesses. So that's where the complaint comes from. It's not people getting upset at businesses which create jobs, which lower prices, provide competition. That's not what it's all about. And he says progress sacrifices the individual. And so he believed, Marx apparently believed, that people derive their sense of personal identity through their job. So when machines replace them, they're lost with no meaning and identity. Think of the handloom worker, okay? Do you think the handloom worker self-identifies as handloom worker, that I can't think of anything else better than being a handloom worker? Really? I don't know. So basically what Marx doesn't understand is that through progress, that handloom worker doesn't have to be a handloom worker anymore. They can go live in Gurgaon, that private city that I showed you the innovation of last week. But going back to labor theory of value. So what does a capitalist believe? What does a free market believe? Subjective theory of value, right? I think we talked about this already. The value is in the eyes of the beholder. And so if I look at your $200 pencil and I'm like, not worth it, then it's worth nothing, right? It's not worth $200. It's only worth $200 if someone is willing to pay $200 to pay for it. But if you have a $200 pencil here and a whole box of pencils over here for $1, I'm going for a box of pencils for $1, okay? So value doesn't come from the amount of time that, a lot of students believe in the labor theory of value, right? When they complain about their test grade back in the day before the Canvas version of quizzes where you have 2 chances to get a good grade, a lot of people, they say, well, I studied 10 hours for this test. I should have gotten an A, but why did I fail? That's labor value theory. Like I supposedly studied 10 hours for this exam, I should get a higher grade. It doesn't say anything about the quality of the study. It doesn't say about were you listening to music and talking to your friends the whole 10 hours? And so you just say, I was 10 hours in the library, but it's 10 hours. Or some people who have photographic memory. only has to glance at the material once. In a minute, they're done studying, right? So according to that student, because a person with photographic memory only spent 5 minutes studying for the test, they should get an F, right? That's labor value theory. Understand that in the free market, it's subjective theory of value. Value comes from the person who wants it. So a Picasso, for example, Picasso painting. Some people say they're priceless. I would never pay even 10 bucks for a Picasso. They're ugly. Seriously, that's my personal opinion. So I never would even try to think about buying a Picasso. But there are other people who say, oh, this is so awesome. And it's priceless, right? And so value is in the eyes of the beholder, just like beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, right? Whatever you think is important, that becomes important for you. And so have at it. But you can't just say, well, I spent 10 hours making this, so you got to pay me a living wage. No, that's not how it works. But that's where Marx, because he's not an economist, he doesn't understand where value comes from. What else we got? Here's page 16. The more modern industry develops, the more is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. He is mad that women are taking men's jobs. Think about that for a second. Women are employed mid-19th century England, and men are being put out of work. Just like I explained last week why that happens. And he is mad. These are men's jobs. Women should not be allowed. He's a sexist. Come on. How anyone can be a Marxist, I do not know. Let's see, because remember what I said, machines make it so that women can do men's work, what traditionally was only men's domain, like logging. Now you get that logging machine, women could do that, children can do it. Partly because of their specialized skill is rendered worthless by new methods of production. So in other words, because of modern technology and more like Home Depot, a lot of the simple jobs around the house you can do by yourself. You don't need to hire a professional to do it. He's very upset, right? Because you're taking away value, you're taking away people's wages. No, you're making things a lot cheaper. Portions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the progress of industry. What is that? That's cronyism, right? So parts of the bourgeoisie, they become the enemy of progress. Those are cronies. They're using their government influence through lobbyists to get regulations to protect them against their competition, right? And he seems to point this out, but he doesn't really understand what it is that he's. And so a free market person here would agree with Marx. So, certain things that, and so he's not really consistent, is what I'm trying to say. Further, as we have already seen, entire sections of the ruling class are, by the advance of industry, precipitated into the proletariat, or are at least threatened by the conditions of existence. So the previous portions of the bourgeoisie itself, whose interests have become antagonistic to the profits of industry. So basically what he's basically saying is bourgeoisie are becoming poor. And then he says here, ruling classes are becoming proletariat, they're becoming poor. So basically what you're beginning to see is a breakup of the classes. This is good, but he seems to be complaining about this. Let's see. Then he says, up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat. So he's talking about revolution, right? Because violence by the good guys is not violence. Look, I tried to make this clear last time. Violence is always violence, just like hypocrisy is always hypocrisy. Hate is always hate. Injustice is always injustice. It doesn't matter how you dress it up. It's always going to be like that. And so right is always going to be right. Voluntarism, no coercion, is always going to be the preferred. Coercion, whether or not you like it or not, it's still coercion. You can't dress it up and change it. Okay, so anyway, that's chapter 1 of Marx. You see there's a lot of things going on that should be sort of, after doing the free market for about 3 weeks, should be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. If this is what Marx is saying, why do people like him so much? See you in the next video.